So the lab in Wuhan was unsafe. That was obvious to Americans visiting there 2 years ago. And because of the practices there, the Chinese may have unleashed a global pandemic on the rest of us. Here's something remarkable and upsetting. The work in that lab, including its research into disease-carrying bats, was funded in part by U.S. taxpayers through the National Institutes of Health. Hard to believe that's true, but it is. Congressman Matt Gaetz represents Florida. He joins us tonight to follow up on this story. Congressman, that's one of those stories that if you had said that out loud a week ago, I think even I might have dismissed you as insane, but it's true. How did this happen?
Yeah, I'm against funding Chinese research in our country, but I'm sure against funding it in China. The NIH gives this $3.7 million grant to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. They then advertise that they need coronavirus researchers. Following that, coronavirus erupts in Wuhan. And then what's really troubling to me is that either conspicuously or miraculously, the Wuhan Institute of Virology is able to sequence the virus on January 2nd, but China doesn't admit to the virus existing to January 9th, and then the Wuhan Institute of Virology doesn't release this important scientific information to the world until January 12th. So at best, Americans are funding people who are lying to us, and at worst, we're funding people who we knew had problems handling pathogens, who then birthed a monster virus onto the world.
By the way, China is about to eclipse us in terms of the size of its economy, if it hasn't already, and it seems like it already may have. Either way, why would we be sending any money to China for any purpose?
There is a far too cozy relationship between U.S. research and Chinese research because there are some research institutions in our country who realize the short-term benefit of Chinese cash. But that doesn't excuse our government. And what should really trouble viewers is that this is an active grant. This isn't something of yesteryear. And so I've called on Secretary Azar to immediately halt this grant to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. They have not been honest, and at worst, they've been negligent to the point of many deaths throughout the world.
This will live on for all time as a metaphor for our incompetence and self-loathing. It looks like there is evidence that this virus escaped from the lab. We don't know that that happened, but it's not a crazy supposition. And now it turns out we were funding the lab. Do you think, just to bottom line it for us, that someone can end the funding to the Wuhan Institute of Virology? If we can't do that, I mean, really.
Well, I believe that Secretary Azar can do it with the stroke of a pen, and certainly it is consistent with the fantastic news that President Trump gave us today, that the United States is no longer going to be a patsy for these America Last organizations like the WHO and the WTO. We've been taken advantage of in those globalist infrastructures for far too long under both Republicans and Democrats. President Trump gives us the chance to liberate ourselves from this and to put our people, our health, and our economy first.
That would be nice. Congressman Gaetz, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tucker.
Leaked Western intel dossier reveals how China deceived the world about coronavirus. A research dossier compiled by the so-called Five Eyes intelligence alliance states that China intentionally hid or destroyed evidence of the coronavirus outbreak, resulting in the loss of tens of thousands of lives around the world. The 15-page document from the intelligence agencies of the US, Canada, the UK, Australia and New Zealand was obtained by Australia's Daily Telegraph newspaper and states that China's secrecy amounted to an assault on international transparency. The dossier touches on themes that have been discussed in media reports about the outbreak of the virus, including initial denial that the virus could be transmitted between humans, the silencing or disappearing of doctors who tried to speak up, the destruction of evidence in laboratories and refusal to provide live samples to international scientists working on a vaccine. Specifically, the file notes that China began censoring news of the virus on search engines beginning December 31, deleting terms including SARS variation, Wuhan seafood market, and Wuhan unknown pneumonia. 3 days later, on January 3, China's National Health Commission ordered virus samples to be either moved to designated testing facilities or destroyed, while simultaneously enforcing a no publication order related to the disease. Perhaps most damningly, the dossier states that Chinese authorities denied that the virus could be spread between humans until January 20, despite evidence of human-human transmission from early December. The dossier is similarly unsparing about the World Health Organization (WHO), stating that it towed the Chinese line about human-to-human transmission despite the fact that officials in Taiwan raised concerns as early as December 31, as did experts in Hong Kong on January 4. As of Friday night, the WHO's official Twitter account still featured a tweet from January 14 that stated, "Preliminary investigations conducted by the Chinese authorities have found no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission of the novel #coronavirus 2019 nCoV identified in #Wuhan, #China." At the same time, the dossier states that throughout February, Beijing, US, Italy, India, Australia, Southeast Asian neighbors and others not to protect themselves via travel restrictions, even as China imposes severe restrictions at home. At the same time, the file states, millions of people left Wuhan after the outbreak and before Beijing locked down the city on January 23. The dossier continues the litany of Chinese defensiveness, stating, as European Union diplomats prepare a report on the pandemic, China successfully presses Brussels to strike language on China disinformation. Similarly, as Australia calls for an independent inquiry into the pandemic, China threatens to cut off trade with Australia. China has likewise responded furiously to U.S. calls for transparency. The Telegraph report does present one point of divergence between the Allied governments, with Australia believing the virus most likely originated in the Wuhan wet market and putting the chances it accidentally leaked from a lab at 5%. By contrast, Fox News reported April 15 that U.S. intelligence officials are increasingly confident that coronavirus likely originated in a Wuhan lab as a consequence of China's attempt to demonstrate that its efforts to identify and combat viruses are equal to or greater than the capabilities of the United States. President Trump said Thursday that he's seen evidence suggesting the virus came from a lab after Fox News and others asked if he knew of anything that gave him confidence that the outbreak originated in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. "Yes, I have," he replied, "and I think that the World Health Organization should be ashamed of themselves because they're like the public relations agency for China." Multiple sources previously told Fox News that it is believed standards in Wuhan were disregarded before the virus leaked, prompting Beijing to initiate a cover-up. Sources also claimed the WHO was complicit from the beginning in helping China cover its tracks. The WHO and China have denied any wrongdoing. The Telegraph also reported that key figures at the Wuhan Institute of Virology previously worked or trained in Australian government labs where they conducted research on pathogens in live bats as part of an ongoing partnership with the Chinese Academy of Sciences. According to the dossier, the team's work at the Wuhan lab involved discovering samples of coronavirus within a cave in Yunnan province and synthesizing a bat-derived coronavirus that could not be cured.